It is most likely that the next generation Chevy Camaro will be, wait for it, a 4-door electric sedan if Chevy decides to even continue with the Camaro nameplate, because the Camaro hasn't been selling that well the past few years or so compared to the Dodge Challenger, which is just nuts because the Challenger came out in 2007, still pretty much outselling the Mustang and the Camaro. So in this video, I want to take a look at this design, what the next generation Camaro could look like. As I said, they say it's going to be a 4-door sedan, but I'm not going to allow that to happen in my rendering here. So what I'm going to do is create an electric EV, but it's still going to have the sports car proportions of the current Camaro. We have a couple of clues of what the next generation Camaro could look like, because recently we've seen a couple of designs from Chevy all electric that are going to go into production. We have the Blazer, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I think they're experimenting a lot in that design, but we also have this gorgeous thing right here. This is the Equinox, and I really hope that Chevy puts this design just as it is into production, because this looks fantastic, a lot better than the Tesla, whichever Tesla is competing with. I think this looks so much better. We have more of an aggressive styling, more styling in general in this design. I really like the line flow. It works a lot better in my opinion than it does on the Chevy Blazer, which I made a video on my second channel, which you can go and check out if you want to. I'm pretty sure we're gonna have this light bar up top because we have it in the Silverado EV. We also have it here in the Equinox. I do like this part on the RS model. I'm gonna show you the non-RS model where it's body colored in just a second and what that looks like. I think I'm gonna keep this style of intake on my Camaro render because it gives it more of a internal combustion feel, and it almost looks like it is a normal grille up front. You can see that we have the light bar up top, not very functional, just for aesthetic purposes, and the headlights are sitting in the bumper, so I'm gonna keep that as well because it seems to be one heck of a trend right now to put the headlights in the bumper, and it looks pretty cool because it gives the designers the opportunity to play around with this area and create a very strong identity with the light design of the car. Let's have a look at the rear view. Even in the rear, I think it looks fantastic, both in the front and the rear. It doesn't just look good for an EV, it just looks like a good looking vehicle, and I think Chevy is really gonna nail this if they decide to put this specific design into production. We do have some things that might suggest that there will be some changes. We do have these door handles that don't maybe look production ready. I'm not sure. We have similar ones. We've seen similar ones in a lot of EVs these days where they just sit flush with the bodywork. So this might actually be something they put into production. I like that it looks like a normal car. It doesn't need to shout with the being designed that, hey, I'm an EV. We can actually stylize and have some nice fenders and sharp lines in the body lines and still make it an efficient EV with sufficient range. I think this looks a lot better than Tesla's, and it definitely looks a whole lot better than the Mustang Mach-E in my opinion. Then we have this light bar that is sequential. So we have not a solid light bar. They kind of break up the closer we get to the center logo here. I think that's a cool touch. And in this Equinox, we also have this black roof, which I'm gonna put into my Camaro render because I think it looks pretty cool. Although I don't think the proportions of a Camaro necessarily need a black roof, because you need it more on a crossover like this to bring the weight inwards to the body and have a narrow waist. You also have that same kind of treatment in the lower parts to make it look less tall of a design, because it is after all a crossover SUV or whatever these things are called these days. So here is the here's the RS version and here's the non-RS version. You can see the differences in the front end, with this part being body colored on the non-RS version. Still looks really good, but I think this looks way sportier when you have the black front end with the grille that looks almost like a regular internal combustion engine. So I'm definitely keeping this instead of this design. Let's have a look quickly at the interior. It looks pretty nice, and this is definitely why I think this is going into production basically as it is right now. We have this charge bar, or maybe auto cruise, autopilot LED green in the steering wheel. We have two separate screens for the infotainment system, very nicely framed here. It's not just an iPad that they glued on the dash. They actually decided to design some chamfers and some edges for these two screens. And then we have the same line or framing for the screen going into the air vents in the center right here, and pretty traditional looking controls with actual dials. It's a clean design. I like the red. Red seems to be also a trend right now. A lot of manufacturers are deciding to put red interiors in the car, and I'm not complaining about that because it looks pretty good. So this is a Camaro that I'm gonna be working on here. I always thought that this generation Camaro, it has a very high front end, which looks good for a muscle car, and isn't that exactly what we want the Camaro to be? A muscle car design. We don't want it to be necessarily a sports front end with a very tight, thin nose. We can still have a big fascia like this that goes all the way up to this point almost vertically, and it creates that muscle car feel. So we can see, maybe we can retain some of that with the inspiration from the front end of the Equinox. So that's what we're gonna do now. Continue here in Photoshop and see where we can take this design, creating this EV of a Camaro, which is so weird to think about. I really hope, first of all, that Chevy decides to actually keep the nameplate Camaro alive, because it's been around since the 60s, so we can't just butcher it. Even though what a lot of companies are doing these days, they just bring back the nameplate of some legendary iconic car and create something completely different that has zero connection to the heritage of that nameplate. The Blazer, for example, is a good example of that. We also have the Mustang Mach-E, which is a crossover electric, as everybody knows, and it doesn't have any resemblance to the previous Mustangs. But I guess that's just the times we live in. I think it's also a great opportunity, a positive thing to have EVs come out these days as well, because it really helps with the creativity for designers. I feel like designers have been stuck for a very long time, over styling. We went into the melted cheese era of the 90s, where everybody had very soft curvatures, and it looked like all the cars were swollen in some way. And then we came into the 2000s, a little bit sharper lines, and then it got progressed into 2010s and up until 2020, and designers just added more and more features and lines and stuff onto the cars, and we reached a peak of overstyling just a few years ago, and now we're dialing it back. So if we were to continue with internal combustion engines, we still need to respect the package of an internal combustion engine. So we were just going in cycles with the designs with the internal combustion package. So opening up for an EV platform, a skateboard of batteries, that is definitely going to bring out some very cool designs from car designers. And I think car designers in general are going to have a lot more fun and almost like a breath of fresh air and new energy into creating cars that don't necessarily need to respect the packages of an internal combustion engine. We have the transmission, the engine, and so on. So what I'm doing here is I want to take the fascia of the Equinox and apply it onto the proportions of the Camaro. I don't want this to be shouting that it is an EV. I want to have the same line that you see going around the greenhouse and then into the shoulder and into the front fender. I want to have that still be connected and still be stretched out all the way to the LED bar that we have in the front end. I also need to make sure that this front end that I'm applying onto the Camaro is actually centered with the original photo, and I have to do that by using a tool called Liquify to move the entire front end more to the right so that it is centered with the lines that we have on the hood. And that means also, of course, that the lower part also needs to have that adjustment taken care of. But the thing is with the Equinox, I think maybe the black part, the black graphics in the lower part sticks up a little too high. So for this Camaro here, this render, I want to create more of a substantial bumper, not by a lot, just a few inches underneath the light bar going into the black graphics, have more of a body panel there to add some structure and some strength in the front end, and not just have it be a big black open mouth in the front. that almost connects directly to the LED bar. I want to have some separation between these two parts, the top part of the front end and the lower part of the front end, by creating some sort of bumper looking style underneath the LED lights. The wheels, I really dig these wheels. I think this is probably the first redesign that I haven't changed the wheel design. I am, however, going to change the size because I want to make it look more like a concept car with oversized wheels. That's my favorite style of sketching and rendering a car. I want to really make it planted, even though it might look a little unrealistic, but it just looks better, at least in my opinion. I also decided in the beginning of this redesign to switch the dynamics of the lower graphics that you have right in the lower part of the door. You see, when we have this shelf, it's growing from being thin closer to the rear wheel, going into thicker the closer it gets to the front wheel. So I want to change that so we have a forward motion instead of kind of inverted motion in that graphics. So we have the thicker part being further to the back, and then it gets thinner as it gets in to and connects with the lines that we have in the front bumper and going through the front wheel. Last but not least, I wanted to make the roof black because I think it would look cool, it would make it look a little different, and also connect it with the rest of the lineup from Chevy that we've seen so far, the Equinox specifically, and also black out the side mirrors just because why not? It's a fun thing to do in Photoshop, so I decided to go that route. That's about it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.